Let's get started. Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us on this panel discussion about why is KVM winning over VMware's vSphere. My name is Panyan Taidi. I'm a Director of Product Marketing here at Oracle, and I'm happy to have our panel of experts introduce themselves. Mark, do you want to go first?
Thanks, Parnian. My name is Mark Stamer. I'm the President and Chief Dragon Slayer of Dragon Slayer Consulting. I've been in a consulting business for 22 years, been in the business over 40 years at this point, and I help vendors market more effectively, and for end users, I help them solve the problems they have in their data center, evaluate different solutions, and figure out what's best for them. And with that, I'll turn it over to Glenn.
Thank you for joining. My name is Glenn Harris. I'm the Vice President in charge of the pre-sales engineers, post-sales engineers, and the customer success team here at Oracle. And I'll turn it over to John.
Hey, thanks, Glenn. John Priest, broadcasting from beautiful Boston, Massachusetts. I'm Director of Product Management for the Oracle Server Virtualization product line, and this includes both our Oracle VM product. We're going to focus more today, really, we're going to focus primarily on the Oracle Linux KVM with Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager. And in the product management role, I'm responsible for setting the direction and delivering the product out to the field. And I'll hand it off to Simon.
Yep, thank you, John. Yeah, my name is Simon Cotter. I'm senior manager in the product management team for Linux and virtualization, and today responsible for both Linux and server and desktop virtualization.
Thank you, Simon. And I know it's a late evening for you, so thanks for everyone who's joining. Before we get into the discussion, I wanted to remind everybody that please, we want to make this as interactive as possible. Use the Q&A button that you see at the bottom of your Zoom screen to put your questions in, or we'll at any time during the broadcast, and then we'll try and answer them at the end. And if we, for any reason, run out of time, we will email you. So please go ahead and put your questions in as it comes up. I did want to show you our safe harbor statement and give you a minute to read through that. Of course, anything about the future is just, it's subject to change if it comes up. And I think we're ready to go. So let me start with the big question. And I'll start with you, Mark. Why are customers choosing KVM over vSphere these days?
That's a really good question, Parnian. So let's get right down to it. Most people will say, oh, it's because of cost. It's a lot lower cost. And that's true, but that's not why they buy. In real terms, that's why they justify why they buy. It's an industry standard. It's not a proprietary standard, and that's a key factor. But what's really changed over the years, it's really easy to use. It's faster. You set up VMs faster. VMs start faster. They run faster. So that's a key issue. It's interoperable on a lot of different hardware and from a lot of different vendors. What you get from one disti is going to be the same from another. It doesn't matter what the distribution, it's going to run and work the same. There's more third-party applications now than ever before. And one of the biggest objections had been in the past was it wasn't as easy to use as vCenter. That's not true anymore with Over. And we'll talk more on that later. And it's open source. And because it's open source, you have a lot more developers focusing on it. And with more developers focusing on it, you have more innovation. Those are the real reasons why people are moving to KVM.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mark, you're right. And you know what? I think that, yeah, this is a thought that I just done some days ago. I think that what we are seeing today is what we already saw, for example, in the 90s. When at the end, in the 90s, we saw Linux, so the open source project was born, and Linux was going to approach the market there. Now, after, yeah, maybe now we are more than 20 years, we have seen that Linux at the end is the market leader, if you want, in the server side. And I think that we are now seeing a very similar experience, where at the end, we had one vendor with a proprietary solution supplying the hypervisor, and so the server virtualization solution. And now we are seeing the open source solution coming up. Like in the past, we have seen Microsoft Windows and and Linux, and so the open source solution coming up. Now we are seeing the same thing on the virtualization side, where we had one vendor with a proprietary solution at the beginning, and now an open source solution coming up and gaining the market.
Simon, you're correct. You're right on the dot there, right on the money. In fact, if you look at it, according to IDC, right now, Linux represents 68% of the servers out in the market today. Think about that for a moment. It went from 0 to 68%, and we're seeing the same type of growth going on with KVM.
Yeah.
But John, let me ask you, are there specific customer problems that KVM can address that vSphere does not?
Yeah, absolutely. And Mark touched on a couple of them, but let me kind of expand on that just a little bit. So a couple of the key things are flexibility. So let me flexibility, scalability, and performance are some of the key items here. And let me kind of dive into each one of these just a little bit. So flexibility, you've got choice. You've got the usability, you know, all the performance and usability that you need, but you can go to our download site today, grab a copy of our software, the Oracle Linux KVM or the Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager, and use them today. No license, it's free and open to use. It gives you the flexibility to use it as you want to. Multi-vendor support, so the ability to have a large ecosystem of partners that integrate with KVM. You've got the ability to tie into a large workforce that knows KVM. So the flexibility from your perspective in the IT operations space is very critical. The source code. So we're open source. So the source code is free to use. You can modify it as you see fit. We're big into the open source community. You've probably seen that in the past with our Linux work, our Zen work, our cloud native environment work. So we use these products. We contribute to these products to make them better products overall. And then scalability is probably the key one. So the ability to start your host faster. So KVM gives you faster startup times than ESXi. KVM will give you higher performance. So you're going to get near native speeds for your applications running in KVM. And one of the key things to maybe consider is that Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, which is a second generation cloud, uses KVM. I mean, we're scaling out thousands of servers with tens of thousands of VMs running there. So we need the high performance for our applications that we're delivering. We deliver that same high performance for your applications within your data center.
That's great.
And there is also another important point, John. Here we are talking of an open source solution that is the hypervisor. And as Mark was saying before, 68% of the servers are today running Linux. So as you can imagine, the Linux and the kernel for all of those servers, all of those VMs running on top of on hypervisor is today at the end built, if you want, from the same people working on those open source communities. So it's something expected, if you want, that a Linux operating system runs faster or runs better on top of an open source hypervisor that at the end is again relying on the same Linux kernel, right?
Well, let me shift gears a little bit and double check on something. Glenn, you work with a lot of customers, you know, in the process helping them move from over to KVM. And I know, you know, Mark was saying price is not, you know, the cost is not the main reason, but we are in unusual times with the pandemic going on now, and cost savings are even more important than before to many IT organizations. What are you seeing on the street? Are you seeing that, you know, cost savings being the main reason people are moving to KVM?
You know, what we're really seeing, it's the main reason that customers are starting to look at KVM. You know, all the features and functionality that were just talked about, they need to be there. You know, you need a feature-rich virtualization platform, or, you know, you just can't move forward. But, you know, customers are really looking at their costs, and they do this all the time. It's just, I think it's been accelerated today in today's environment. You know, and if you go back and look at the history of virtualization, the original total cost of ownership was fantastic, right? You had these bare metal applications that were designed for peak usage and pinned to one or two servers. You know, and that really led to, you know, server sprawl. But the problem was that these applications are always built for the peak time of the year. which could be 2 or 3 or 4 days, at the end of a quarter or something like that. And the CPU utilization rates were around 15 or 20%. So you had this enormous server sprawl that was going on. And you also had, costs in managing these environments and building out data centers and licensing technologies that, were increasing as well. So enter virtualization, and, data centers started to consolidate, idle CPUs started to get used, hardware costs were reduced, and an initial benefit. But with virtualization technologies, users can now even overutilize CPU. So what we're seeing now is that where we had server sprawl in the past, now we have virtualization sprawl, and and the prices of virtualization products, proprietary ones especially, have started to exceed the benefit. So no, TCO, cost is not the the reason, but it's vitally important that it be cost effective. But it's really making customers look at their current environments. And Mark, you and I were talking about this last week. You had some good points on the hidden costs of TCO, if you want to talk about those.
When people look at cost, what they really think about is expense or price. They're looking at what they're paying for or paying for the support and maintenance, but they're leaving out all the other major cost factors. And let me give you an example of a cost factor. Patching and upgrading. We all love patching and upgrading, but that takes time. And when I say love, I'm being facetious there. It's one of those things that if it's disruptive, you got to schedule it. You got to do the rolling, and then you got to make sure that it worked right. Sometimes you got to back it out. That's all part of the cost. In addition, there are other aspects of cost, like how many people are trained, and do they have to have specialized training? If they have to go to a school to get trained, there's cost involved there. There's always aspects to cost, like the infrastructure, the hardware that you're running it on. Most people, when we talk about different hypervisors, they look at the software and not the underlying hardware. One of the things I've run across is, I've gotten this from people over time. They'll tell me that, yeah, well, I find my KVM's not as fast as my VMware or my vSphere. And if we look at the hardware and compare exactly what's running, it's not exactly the same. So again, you got to take a look at overall factors when you start talking about cost. What are you doing with cost? And it's the hidden costs that are going there. For example, in the hardware, it's how many servers do you have? If you've got VM sprawl, you're going to have more physical servers anyway. Then you have more switches and more ports and more cables and more rack space. There's a lot of factors in cost. It's a justification at the end of the day, but it's a key one.
Thank you. Simon, John and Mark talked about performance and scalability a little bit. I was wondering if you can do a deeper dive into it. KVM has lower overhead than vSphere. How does that work for both performance and scalability?
Yeah, so the good point of KVM is that it's an hypervisor where, at the end, it's the hypervisor today leveraging all the possible enhancement and all the possible improvements that had been done during the years on the Linux kernel. And this is the one huge advantage for the KVM hypervisor. That said, the other important topic, or the other huge change that we had seen on KVM hypervisor, is related to companies, or the list of companies that they decided to invest on this hypervisor. And I can share a very quick experience. So yeah, because before joining the product management team, I was a technical consultant, and I remember that around maybe 9 or 10 years ago, I had to migrate off some VMs, some services. So when I say migrate off, I mean migrate from KVM to Zen hypervisor, for example, or other hypervisor solution, different Oracle services. And yeah, I had to migrate just because there were different performance issues or different limitations on the solution. But after that, a huge change happened for KVM hypervisor. So we had seen so many companies, and if you want, also today, all the main cloud vendors deciding to invest on the KVM hypervisor. And between obviously these important lists, we also have Oracle. So today we as a cloud vendor at Oracle, we also rely on the same Oracle Linux KVM, right? And the cool point related to KVM is that today KVM also runs on the latest and greatest Oracle Exadata. So last year, during the Open World in September, Larry Ellison announced the Exadata X82M. And as you know, the Exadata is today maybe the fastest system where to run an Oracle database. And the cool point here is that the KVM hypervisor that you can find on Oracle Linux is also the same KVM hypervisor that runs on Oracle Exadata. And so thanks to what happened, or thanks to the fact that so many cloud vendors, so many companies decided to invest a lot on the KVM hypervisor, KVM today is really a solution that can easily scale in terms of number of servers, amount of resources dedicated to your VMs and so to your services. And the overhead, as already said, and the overhead is really really a reduced one if you compare KVM with possible other hypervisors or other virtualization solution. So a huge change happened, and today we can easily pick up the result of those important changes in the open source.
I mean, I just want to add something to what you said. You're right. A lot of people are investing in KVM, including all the hyperscalers. Of course, they may not be using it as is, but modifying it. Or some of the hyper-converged players like Nutanix, it's not exactly KVM, but it's a variation. So KVM is winning over not just end users, it's winning over infrastructure.
Okay.
Yeah, and let me add one point, because I agree, performance is key. Performance is a table stake that we all need to drive forward. We've been working with Linux for years now and made a number of enhancements with UEK5 and UEK6. That's a table stake and we deliver. You need usability also. So in order to be able to unlock that potential at a hypervisor, you need the ability to set up your networking and set up your storage within your virtualization environment, and snapshots and role-based access. And all that comes with the Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager, which is a very easy to use, very easy to automate solution to give you that ability to deliver the VMs, start up VMs, set up VMs, but also, as we talked about, tying in the fact that we can do all that with lower costs. So performance, usability, cost, all, check the boxes for, Oracle Linux KVM and Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager.
Actually, let me follow up with that, what you just said. We've so far been talking about KVM, and the benefits it has over vSphere, but multiple, vendors offer KVM. What are the advantages specifically to Oracle Linux KVM? And Simon, could you start with that?
Yeah, so yeah, maybe one important thing to know that you cannot find written somewhere. Internally at Oracle, there are different teams today working on KVM. So as already said, Oracle Linux KVM is today leveraged by, and it's available also on the Oracle Cloud. It's there on the Oracle Exadata, and it's also available for our on-prem customers as on commodity hardware, so on any x86 system. The cool point is that into the same Oracle Linux KVM, we are today addressing all the requirements and all the enhancement dedicated to the KVM hypervisor. And if you want, we have two different major types of requirements and enhancement. As a cloud vendor, we have scalability requirements, right? As an engineering system vendors, we have performance requirement, and we cannot skip them, right? Because we rely on the same KVM hypervisor for other services. And the same, again, the same KVM is there. So the same KVM that runs on the Oracle Cloud is the same KVM that you can run on-prem on your own systems. There is no difference. And that said, the Oracle Linux is not only an operating system. Oracle Linux is really a solution. It's really an ecosystem. And around Oracle Linux, we have, for example, a very important feature or a very important product, because it's not only a feature, that is named ksplice. And ksplice is a solution that allows to install security fixes on the host, as well as on your virtual machines, Oracle Linux virtual machines running on top, without any kind of outage, without any kind of downtime for your services running on top. And ksplice is today able to patch both the kernel as well as the user space stuff. And it's an important differentiator, because at that point, you are not really required to shut down your services while applying security fixes, right? That said, another very, very important thing to know is that, again, just because the KVM hypervisor at Oracle is leveraged by many different solutions, many different service types, we also have our own virtual drivers dedicated to run Microsoft Windows on top. So Oracle Linux KVM can be picked up for Linux services, for Oracle products, but everything that we do on KVM for Oracle services, Oracle products, can be also leveraged by, for example, Microsoft Windows, by any other solution that runs on top of Microsoft Windows. So we have virtual drivers dedicated to Microsoft Windows. Those are built by Oracle and certified by Microsoft. That means that also Microsoft Windows can run supported on top of Oracle Linux KVM.
What about the management piece? What is Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager based on?
So Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager is based on an open source project named Overt. Overt is an open source project started years ago. It's a full management solution for the KVM hypervisor. It's the solution where today, as Oracle, we are working and on which we are building Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager. The cool point even here is that we do not just build Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager starting from the open source utility or the open source Overt solution. Before releasing, we have a QA and QE teams testing all the possible functionalities, testing all the possible enhancement before getting those released to our customers.
Great. And I think you started talking about a little bit more of the advantages we have, for example, over the IBM Red Hat KVM solution. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, one of them was ksplice. The other one is the hard partitioning. Hard partitioning is also a very important thing dedicated to the licensing of Oracle products. Others are, for example, the enterprise manager integration. So the option to have a single pane of class management where you can manage and monitor and administer starting from the hypervisor arriving to the service that is running on top. The Oracle software certification, obviously. So the fact that today all the Oracle products are certified and supported to run on top of Oracle Linux KVM. And the important point to know is that also the Oracle database team is today working and developing on top of our Oracle Linux KVM hypervisor. Another important point is related to templates. So templates that can bring you a very fast solution on how to deploy your VMs, your virtual machines, as well as your services on top of Oracle Linux KVM. And obviously, last but not least, the fact that we have a very easy support subscription model. At the end, with the Oracle Linux Premier support, you have the support for the Oracle Linux, you have the support for the Oracle Linux KVM, ksplice, and also the cloud native environment. So this kind of thing means that with one unique support subscription, you get everything supported by Oracle. And this is valid for the physical system as well as the VMs.
Great, thanks. So it seems like there's a lot of benefits there which grow exponentially if you have any kind of Oracle footprint in your data center. Let me actually double click on one of the things you said, and I was wondering if, John, you could talk about hard partitioning. What does that really mean and how does it work?
Yeah, thanks, Barney. And it's another one of those value differentiators. We talked about technical differences, and I can't, stress enough the value of K-Splice as a technical differentiator. Talking to users such as the audience today about the need to stay current with patching but not have downtime, K-Splice is your answer. And it's really even much more, it's great for Oracle Linux as a guest. It's even better for Oracle Linux KVM, where you're talking about kernel patching that could impact 10, 20 guest VMs that are running there. You don't have to impact those guests at all. You apply the patches, no reboot required. So very powerful when we're talking about virtualization. What we're showing here also is more along the lines of total cost of ownership and a benefit that you see there through hard partitioning, where instead of licensing across a whole server for an application, by using CPU pinning technology to be able to pin your virtual machines to cores, you can limit the amount of licensing exposure that you've got. So it's a really powerful way to continue to drive down that TCO that we talked about. Both, you've got the licensing benefits, you've got virtualization benefits, you've got hard partitioning benefits also, where you can drop down, your exposure there. And, we've got many customers that use hard partitioning, and not getting into specifics as far as the customers, but you can see upwards of 75% savings. We've got real customer examples that have used hard partitioning to reduce their applications licensing costs by upwards of 75% using hard partitioning. So another one of those value adds on top.
Great, thank you. And I was wondering, Glenn, could you do a double take on the TCO benefits specifically for Oracle Linux KVM? What can customers see?
Sure. Look, customers want a predicting pricing model. They don't want surprises. They don't want escalating costs. And that's what we sort of talked about earlier in the conversation. Oracle has a very simple pricing model. It's Oracle Linux. It includes an entire distribution, so KVM, Virtualization Manager, K-Splice. All this is just included in one bundle, one SKU, one price. It's a server-based model, and that's a physical server, not virtual servers. I've seen our competitors actually produce white papers to explain the complexity of their pricing. That's Oracle's pricing model. How many physical servers do you have? Count them up, you're done. So we don't sort of charge a tax or a penalty for the way you use our virtualization technologies. In other words, usage just doesn't affect the price. I've seen centralized versus decentralized pricing models that accelerate with the number of virtual CPUs you create. Can you imagine creating, your 9th virtual CPU, and you've now got to go back to the vendor and pay more money? Customers, it's just frustrating. It's unpredictable costs. We don't have license keys to manage. It's open source. We don't have separately priced add-ons, that you have to purchase to get additional functionality. Everything's included. And Mark brought up a really good point about, the price of the product is not the end. How do I train these people? Well, it's a very low learning curve with Overt. It's an even teach yourself type of learning curve. So, predictable costs, low learning curve, no taxes for usage. I think customers really respond to that, and that's why they look to our technology.
Glenn, I can't agree with you more. It's intuitive, especially Overt. But the other thing we talked a little bit about TCO earlier. If you have lower overhead, it means that you need less resources to run your VMs. If you need less resources to run your VMs, you can run more of them, get the same performance in less hardware. Less hardware means less cost, less infrastructure, less cables, less rack space. All those are factors when it comes to cost.
Mark, let me actually go back to one thing you said earlier about advantage of being open source. Both KVM and our solution, management solution, is based on Overt, another open source technology. So is that really an advantage? Isn't there a downside to that?
Of course, there's always pros and cons to everything. So let's talk about the pros and I'll cover the cons. On the pro side, you got multi-vendor support. Lots of vendors are supporting KVM. Big vendors, small vendors, innovative vendors. You have faster development of features and you get more innovation. You have interoperability, which makes it easy to switch between vendors if that's what you want to do. And you're more likely to work on a variety of different hardware infrastructures because you have support from different vendors, which makes it nice. Now, from a downside point of view, you can get arguments and you can get delays because people are trying to get their feature into the code and they don't want that feature into the code because that happens no matter what. But along those lines, it's not a bad thing ultimately because you still end up with a lot more innovation as a result.
I guess as long as you get an enterprise-grade support for those open source projects, that works, right?
You got it.
What about, you know, Overt versus VMware's vCenter? How do they compare?
I've been really impressed with Overt, especially lately in the latest versions. It's incredibly intuitive. It's a modern GUI infrastructure. And one of the things I really like is just like KVM, it can let you manage cross-platform. So if you have some running on Intel x86 and AMD x86 and Itanium and PowerPC, even the mainframe, you can manage it all from one Overt. And the same thing, ARM is coming. It's not there right now. So when you have a mixed environment, and who doesn't have a mixed environment today, you can still manage it from one Overt. And again, it's incredibly intuitive and easy to use and point and click. And if you don't like the point and click, you can use the API or the CLI. And the other aspect that I like about Overt, it lets you manage everything: the VM management, the cluster management, the storage management, the network management, the backup and DR, the live migration and snapshot, and even the integration with other open source projects. It's a very nice management interface.
That's great. That's great. You're simple and easy always wins. Let me ask about vSAN. A lot of vSphere users use vSAN for their storage management. And I was wondering, Simon, if you could address that. What would they use if they use KVM? What could users use there?
Yeah, so at Oracle, we started to work on software, local-only software distributed storage solution some years ago when we introduced the support for Gluster. And again, Gluster is, for example, another component part of the Oracle Linux ecosystem. So some years ago, we introduced Gluster, and yeah, this year when we have announced the Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager 4.3 release, we also introduced the support of Gluster with Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager and Oracle Linux KVM. So today, by the same great web interface that you have with Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager, you can also manage Gluster. So over there, you have one unique interface, as Mark was already saying, where you can manage compute, VMs, storage, networking, storage, the storage domains that is the same concept of the VMware data store, as well as the real storage, because over there you can also manage cluster. And again, Gluster is part of the Oracle Linux Premier support. So even that one, there is no, the cool point here of the solution, because I heard more than one time talking of TCO, is that there is no hidden cost around this kind of solution, right? There is one support subscription that covers everything. And yeah, the answer at the end is Gluster, but not only, because at Oracle, we also have a dedicated alliance team that is used to work with many different partners. Between them, obviously, we also have storage vendors. Storage, that means physical storage vendors, as well as software storage solution vendors. And we work with them. So we work also with partners to get their storage solution certified to run with Oracle Linux KVM.
Thank you, Simon. We've covered a lot of reasons why you'd want to choose KVM, but let's say you are using vSphere. And let me ask you, John, how easy or difficult is it to move from vSphere over to KVM?
Yeah, if you could move the slide one, Parnian. I mean, this is a question that comes up in every single conversation that I have with users, customers, partners. Okay, they see the value, they love the performance, they like the usability, total, all that's great. So how do I get there? So there's a few ways to do it. I was actually just talking to a customer a couple of days ago that had already done the migration from VMware into Oracle Linux KVM. The way that they did it was you can do an export import. So you're going to export an open virtualization archive file, which is a standard file format. You can take that out of your VMware environment, move that over into Oracle Linux KVM. It works. It's a workable solution there. And like I said, they've now moved a number of their hosts from ESXi into Oracle Linux KVM with that process. A better way to do that is to actually use the virtv2v functionality, which is a utility that's available through the community. Again, it's an open source project. And like I said earlier, we're big into the open source community. You could use virtv2v because it tightly integrates with Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager. And the way the utility works is it's going to allow you to tap into your VMware vCenter environment to be able to identify virtual machines that you want to pull out of that environment, bundle up, and move over to Oracle Linux KVM. The beauty of the feature also is that it can be automated. So you can actually build automation around that process to grab virtual machines, move them into Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager. And once they're over there in Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager, you've got full control over at that point. You can edit that VM, you can start that VM, all the typical operations you're going to do, you've got full control over it at that point. So it's an easy way to pull virtual machines, and you can see on the slide here a link to a community page that gives you the exact steps that you need to run through to do that integration with virtv2v. And I know also that some of our consulting team has worked with either partners or customers directly to do a lot of these migrations. And Glenn, I think you've got a few examples of some migrations that we've helped with.
Yeah, you know, I'll give you an example of one of our largest telecommunication customers, literally in the world. They, and I think telecommunications is a good example because they have hundreds of thousands of virtual machines in their environments, and they really stress anybody's software. So, you know, this customer is an Oracle Linux customer. They did a study on their data center costs overall, and they zoomed in on their vSphere costs, which just were, you know, in the tens of millions. And it was over a couple of weeks. They engaged one of my consultants. It was just, you know, couple week type of engagement. And what we did for them was we set up a migration factory, you know, in their environment. We call that a quick start. So what we did was we took a sampling of the various production vSphere virtual machines, and we did in fact use the virtv2v utility to convert them into the KVM environment. When we imported, we started them up. Each ran without fail. Customer was really pleased by that. You know, we also did a knowledge transfer, you know, on how to migrate. So, you know, we're there really to enable the customer. You know, as I said in my title, one of my jobs is customer success. You know, if a customer does need our help, we want to get in, help them get out, and make them independent. So now they're operating this migration factory themselves. You know, we also did knowledge transfer on overt. You know, KVM is just built into Linux, so you know people know that they don't need a lot of training on KVM itself. You know, and the thing that the customer really liked was that they were already an Oracle Linux customer, so there were no additional costs. You know, being a premier support customer, to implement the KVM overt solution, and you know they were kind of thrilled by that. They also really liked the integration with Ksplice, you know, because they have tens of thousands of VMs. They can patch the host, they can patch the guests. You know, when CVEs come out, they really like that. And you know, their next step is to move to hard partitioning and exploring, you know, where that can, you know, further reduce their costs. So, you know, I'd say that's a very typical type of customer, just only difference being that it's an extremely large environment.
Great, thank you, Glenn. I think now let's switch and get to some of our audience questions. But before that, I just wanted to say that let everybody know that in about 2 weeks, we are going to have a kind of a hands-on webinar that's how to do just what they were, John and Glenn were talking about, how to migrate from VMware vSphere to Oracle Linux KVM. So they will send you information in email about that, but you want to look for that coming up on August 12th. We have a technical article that talks about this migration in detail, and we also have a paper that really gets into how do you do CPU pinning and hard partitioning with Oracle Linux KVM so that you can get all those benefits. Thank everybody for joining us in this panel discussion. Please stay connected with us, follow our blog. There's a lot of good articles there that come out, and thank you again. Stay healthy and safe.